Today we're talking about power training, what it is, when to do it, when not to do it, who should be doing it, who shouldn't be doing it, and then maybe how to apply it. So when we talk about power training, I think it's important that we define kind of what it is, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. It isn't complicated, but it is somewhat complex, and I think it's important that we maybe break down a little bit of the complexity there so that both the advanced and maybe novice exercise are on the same page. Because bottom line is I see a lot of power exercises showing up in some basic programming or being suggested through social media or even in like these templated programs I'm see coming across in people's laps that people are sharing with me. Like, here's my program. I'm like, why is that in there like that? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So let's start, CeCe, with just defining sort of what power training is.
So power training is looking at force times velocity. And when we're talking about force, we're talking about maximal muscle recruitment or maximal energy production in the shortest amount of time. And velocity is adding the speed with a directional component. So let's just say, an exercise that people are familiar with, such as a half kettlebell swing, and we're working on power production. We're working on recruiting the muscles surrounding our hips, our glutes, and bringing that kettlebell up and through. So bringing our hips hinging from a hinge position up into an extension position.
As fast as possible,
but yet still controlling the direction of where that kettlebell is going.
And the momentum that's involved there and those things and those are the key components to
momentum.
Power
I think is really important there.
And it's a modality that we use that does involve momentum, right? And if there is one, like power training is that place where we're going to be using momentum, and the goal is to control it. It's interesting. You picked the kettlebell swing. I think, when I think of, if I ask kind of the average Joe what his or her perception of what a power exercise would be, it wouldn't have been that one. They wouldn't have picked that one.
I think it would have been like a clean,
maybe, yeah, like
snatch.
I think nowadays, yeah. So there's been so much, exposure to that. Weightlifting as a sport is sort of coming back to life, but it was really introduced or sort of reintroduced to a lot of people through the CrossFit world. And in a lot of different ways. Some was good, some was not so good. But the bottom line is, I think most people know what kind of a clean looks like now, what a snatch looks like now. Those were a big part of the training methodology for CrossFit. But there's power lifting, right? And so when people think powerlifting, it's usually the squat, the deadlift,
and the bench press,
which it has kind of a weird connotation. Like, yes, you will. If the best lifters in the world, powerlifters, again, powerlifting being defined by the sport of powerlifting, which is getting on the platform, deadlift, squat, or bench press. They're probably the best ones are going to add some speed training or some velocity or power training into their routine. But I don't think most people really understand the difference between strength training and power training, and that powerlifting actually looks a lot more like a feat of strength than it does a feat of power.
1000%.
So let's talk about the difference between power training and strength training. Strength training just being the ability to produce more force than is being applied to you, right? So it's basically mass moving mass. So you put 600 pounds on that barbell, it's sitting on the floor, you pick it up. That's in powerlifting, that's called, the deadlift competition or whatever. But it really is, there's nothing fast about that, right? It's just simply, I got to get the weight from the floor basically to my hips and then back to the floor under some level of control. Versus, you mentioned the kettlebell swing, we were talking about the Olympic lifts, the Olympic lifting, weightlifting being snatches, clean and jerk. And that being watching that lift come off the floor very quickly, or at least being accelerated off the floor. And it's not that a deadlift isn't being accelerated. You just can't really see it, right? Again, going back to the best powerlifters are going to train some speed, but when you look at that snatch, it's how that bar moves very, very quickly, and then moves, into almost a pause position, and then it's being powered out of the bottom. So I think it can be confusing for people again. So if we think of like strength just being your ability to overcome force, right? But with power training, it's force times velocity, speed, and then the directional component is really important. So that kind of lays out the basics about those two things. I see these things being mixed up, right, in programming, right, and I see some randomness in programming where it was a strength program, but somehow now I'm looking at more of a power type component being implemented in here. So let's talk about the programming piece and why power training is important and for who it's important for. So CeCe, I'll give that one to you.
Power training, I think is most important for those who are physically active, like athletes, competitive athletes, or individuals who need to be reactive in their occupation or in life. I think it sets for a really good foundation for individuals to be able to react to whatever is happening in their environment.
Does that mean that your average Joe or your average gym goer shouldn't be doing some type of power or implementing some type of power training into their programming at any time? That's not what I'm hearing you say.
No.
Because you could be, so for me, for that person that's active, I might only be active for certain parts of the year. I'm like that snowbird, right, who goes to the snow in the wintertime and I want to snowboard or ski. And that's the only time really during my life that I need any kind of reactive type of ability. In which case, doing some type of power training in preparation for my ski season or whatever could be appropriate. But as a basis for your total programming throughout the year, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No, I think, if you are an average individual who has a strength training or weight training program, I think there are definitely times that it may be appropriate to put in some power training to help with cycling and getting the results and the gains that you're looking for. But it's got to be applied appropriately. And it's not something that you want to do on an everyday type of basis.
So that's important. Yeah, that's important. So we go back to sort of the physiology, what's happening from an energy system perspective and how to get the most of it.
I said on an everyday basis. And I want to retract what I said because, you can do power training for the lower extremity. You can do power training for the upper extremity. But the thing is if you're doing power training for the upper extremity, you are going to be using some of your lower extremity for it. But that's not it's all about the application and what it is you're doing and applying it.
So I think when we look back to the application, we've had this conversation before. When Jeff's been on the show, we've talked about sort of our triangle of awareness and the different types of things that people might be trying to achieve in the gym when they come in. And you can really break it down to these three things anytime, right? It doesn't matter who you are, what walk of life you're coming from. You're probably focused on one of these things. And that's going to be either on one side of the triangle. One of the most popular ones and most well understood is the aesthetics piece. I want to look better, right? I want to lose a little body fat, build a little bit of muscle, lean up, look better naked, that kind of thing. The other side of the triangle, one of the other sides of the triangle might be the performance piece. So if you are an athlete, if you're active and you need to be more reactive, as CeCe was explaining, or obviously if you're a professional athlete, the power training starts to come into play more there. Or if you just have a goal, again, like I really want to be ready for ski season this year, then you might be going through a performance training phase or performance training program. And then the last piece is that longevity piece, more of the health and wellness piece, just staying generally fit, staying generally healthy, and making sure you're kind of ready for and prepared to be resilient and do the things that you want to do when you want to do them. So let's maybe kind of take a look at those things and how might power training be implemented for those different types of individuals that have those very specific goals. And I want to start with probably the most obvious, which would be the performance goals. Those that need power and need that high degree of reactivity or explosiveness for their chosen sport or activity. Let's talk about what exercises you might start with and when you might start to apply those into your program. And we can also talk about for how long and, duration and those kind of things, as you sort of alluded to with regard to the training every day. So performance training, performance athlete, let's say they want to be ready for a specific event. And I use the ski event for the winter, but it also could be, the athlete that's, I guess the football athlete maybe is a going, or the volleyball athlete, or somebody that's has to produce power at certain points of the year, but not all year because they have an off season. So things to talk about here. So let's talk about that athlete and when is it appropriate to begin applying power training and how might we do that?
That's a loaded question because it depends on the type of athlete that we're talking about. How old are they? How many years of lifting or sport participation do they have behind them? If we're talking about an adolescent versus talking about, a high school kid versus somebody who's in college, that's all going to depend.
It depends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a loaded question. So let's talk about this. What are the basic things that you need fundamentally in order to, what should the prerequisites be, Jeff, from a human position? What should the prerequisites be before you start training as a quote unquote athlete in this power dynamic?
So for me, when I'm looking at clients trying to get into power, one of them is going to have mobility, right? Proper ranges of motion, tissue quality, and stabilization. And when I say stabilization, yes, I mean co-contraction of the joints, being able to have awareness, but also stabilization through full body tension that we learn through powerlifting or strength training, right? And being able to have all of that awareness and take it into the powerlifting. So for instance, if I'm going to have you do an explosive movement, like just an explosive barbell squat, right? Have you drive out and you don't know how to squat, it's probably going to look like Bambi on ice, right?
That's a good analogy.
Not good, right? I mean, we don't need that, and we shouldn't have the knees sliding in and out. And a lot of coaches will say it's fine. The Olympic guys, I just think they're lazy with the mobility, to be honest. But having the mobility, proper tissue quality, stabilization, and strength body awareness to take in to produce force. If I don't know how to produce force, I've never produced force, how am I going to take myself through a power phase and train that modality?
Well, not just produce force, but then also absorb the force.
Bigger picture of that is deceleration, like you're talking about.
Yeah. So this is great that you just brought this up as we kind of dial it back. Okay. So what are the things you need to do in order to prepare yourself for effective power training?
I mean, I think every individual should be able to squat, be able to move their body vertically up and down with a stable base, right? And when I'm saying stable base, feet on the ground. Be able to hinge. They need to be able to know how to use their hips through a range of motion as their torso is coming forward and down, and be able to pull themselves up out of that position without necessarily using their low back. How do their legs and their hips work together to bring the torso up? In addition to that posterior chain, upper posterior chain. We also need to know how to push with our upper body and pull with our upper body, whether that's horizontal or vertical. Those are very fundamental types of movement patterns that need to be solid, because if they're not solid, then you're going to end up with some type of injury or overuse at some point. We see it a lot with individuals here who do not have sound pushing and pulling mechanics, because then their shoulder blades aren't working at the ratio that they need to when there's shoulder movement patterns happening. So, I would say foundationally, you need to be able to squat, hinge, push, pull, and then also rotate.
Yep. So Jeff, I think you were sort of chomping at the bit to maybe come over the top on that, but maybe not. There's a couple of things that you said there about the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are not sexy. They're
boring.
They look boring, right? But that's all about intention, right? And once you learn, you mentioned being able to squat, right? And Jeff, you mentioned tissue quality and mobility. So when you start combining poor tissue quality and poor mobility, and you lack the fundamentals to do those basic movement patterns in all those different ways, then what ends up happening is you get a shitty movement pattern, right? And there is no perfect movement pattern. Everybody's an individual, but there is such thing as a shitty movement pattern. And if you continue to load and stress that movement pattern, you mentioned, CeCe, that, okay, we're probably going to set ourselves up for injury or something else. And the something else just could be, you're never going to fully express the power or strength that you have because of your shit movement pattern, right? Because you didn't go through the fundamental sort of steps to get to where you needed to be, and you continue to just put more weight on the bar, right? Or you continue to overcompensate, or you continue to ignore that thing that was kind of popping up until the point where you've hurt yourself, or it's then stopped you or taken away, or you recognize that no matter how hard you train, you're never going to reach that peak performance because you never reached a fundamental base level performance before you started stacking on.
Because people will think it's boring. I don't want to work on my mobility. It's going to take all the stuff. Well, you're going to be working on it when you're injured down the line somewhere.
One way or another.
Might as well just start and work on it.
Yeah, we're going to have to
just include it in your workout.
I'll say we're going to have to unfuck you at some point, right? So why don't we just start with that right now and save ourselves a lot of time, aggravation, and potential damage down the road? I can speak firsthand to that, of just trying to power through shit and ultimately paying the price for that. I know probably you guys can at certain times in your in your history. Okay, so how long does it take to really prepare the body to be able to do this? And I know the answer to that depends, but let's talk about it. So you mentioned, is that a youth athlete? Is it more of an advanced athlete? How long does it take to sort of prep the tissue, have that strength, have that coordination and whatnot? Can we sort of play in that?
I think we have to separate them from contact and non-contact, right?
Okay, let's do it.
You mean sport?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think your question might also involve the average individual who walks through our doors here at Red Dot Fitness, right? Who may have dabbled in some strength training at some point, or who may not have at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we take the individual who has zero experience, that's completely new to strength training, then I would say at least at minimum, at very, very minimum, you're talking like 6 to 8 weeks for that individual as far as a preparatory phase for them. You teaching them how to move their bodies through, certain ranges of motion. If they've never done this before, having some kind of body awareness and, take them through the process as far as making that mind-body connection as far as, okay, so she's asking me to do a push-up, but I'm supposed to keep my hips still.
Right. I think it is a big question because it is very individual. Some people will have that body awareness a little faster, maybe based on previous experience. Just they just have it, right, from whatever life. But when you're saying 6 to 8 weeks, we're talking about some physiology or some physiological changes that are happening during that time that can be achieved in like that 6 to 8 week period. But even like in that 6 to 8 week period, what I start to see is like, okay, now this person is starting to really get it, right? Like in 6 to 8 weeks, the proprioception, right? The movement mechanics, the ability to control their body in space, proprioception, if I didn't already say that. But also they're starting to realize they're building some strength. And with that foundation, that 6 to 8 weeks sort of upfront foundation, now we can start layering on. And then it's really like, okay, so where is power training appropriate at this point? Should we even be like, does it make sense to put it in there? The question then becomes why, right? And if we're in a sort of a tightened up time span, like person comes to us in November, wants to be ready for ski season in February, February to March. Okay, maybe we need to accelerate things. We have to do that appropriately. But that's all dependent on how they respond to the training program.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're also talking about frequency. How many times a week are we seeing this person? Right. How many times a week is this person doing something?
Are they doing their homework on their own?
Right. How many? Yeah. So those are like your prerequisites for like kind of that newbie before we might start introducing things we've added a little bit more speed or velocity into it. And one of the exercises you brought right up front was the kettlebell swing. It can be a very effective way to teach somebody how to move explosively,
especially with the momentum too.
Correct. Yeah. There's a little bit more lower risk. We have a little, if you're good with as a coach and you have a client that's very responsive to that coaching, you can very quickly sort of accelerate through the coaching process of getting them to feel what it's like to A, add velocity, B, control the momentum, and C, be able to do it repeatedly, very consistently. Yeah.
You know, I was just thinking, we were talking about the kettlebell swing, and one of my favorite exercises to start individuals with, if we're talking about power training, and they haven't had a bunch of experience in the past, is that our Dynamax log toss, where you only have to work on the concentric component, but there's also then the breathing component, right? And the trunk stabilization and diaphragmatic component that you're having to elicit when you're creating power through the body to get that ball to move, you know, and to create velocity there. So
there's a lot of moving pieces. And so 6 to 8 weeks would be very accelerated for a newbie, right? I mean, yeah, in my mind, when I think
that's why I say absolute, like, minimum.
Bare minimum, right? So then you kind of move to the next level. It's like, well, if we could really do it in a really great way, for somebody that's brand new coming into this, they would spend the first year learning all the things that you just said. All the fundamentals. Yeah. It's a minimum 6 to 12 months, in my mind, of really building a strong foundation of strength, movement mechanics. And we do that through sort of like a functional bodybuilding type of approach. We'll start with much less than that, but as things progress and they become stronger and they're starting to apply those loads to their body in different ways and through different planes, different ranges of motion, and they're getting familiar with the equipment. They're getting familiar with the breathing technique. They're getting familiar with how they're recovering or not recovering. Along the way, the frequency starts to uptick, right? We started at 2 days a week, then we moved to 3, then there was 4, then we had to dial them back because they wanted to go to 7, right? And we moved through these different phases of training. By the time we've done that over the course of the year, we have a really good baseline, and we've tracked, right? We have a really good baseline of kind of where they've been. And so now how to apply the power training to that person. So that's like the novice, right? That's the novice to maybe barely intermediate lifter who's just being introduced to this stuff. Let's go to the more advanced lifter, or I'll call it an athlete. I'm not so sure if that's the right term, but the more advanced lifter, somebody that has been lifting for several years, fairly consistently with minimal breaks or whatever, and has a solid understanding of strength training as a whole, what their body can do, the good proprioception, neuromuscular control to some extent, may have some mobility issues. Most people do, right? May have some proprioceptive issues when it comes to some of the more complex type movements. But in general, they're a little bit more advanced. How do we begin to kind of implement this into the program?
I think you have to ask the first question: what are the goals of this individual?
Yeah, you know, when I'm looking at, let's say, a more advanced athlete, this is where you can really start meshing power and strength together, right? To really increase the force production of a main mover. I know NASM does it in reverse. I know now that everyone's big on the CNS activator before a bench, let's say a bench press, right? I go in the bench press, I get my medicine ball, I get up at the wall, and I pump that medicine ball, boom, 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 5 times, boom. Go into the bench press. I'm supposed to have a higher rate of force production because I've woken the CNS up. I know that NASM, back when I did 10 years ago, they were doing it where it was you do the bench press and then you would do an explosive movement after. There's just many ways that you can do it, but that's one of the ways that you can start adding power into a program at a lower threshold than some of the traditional power movements.
Right. So what you're speaking about is like contrast training, right? Where exactly. you would have a very fundamental strength-based movement followed by a power movement, and an explosive power movement. So there's a couple components to think about here. So we're talking about the more advanced person here. And this is important for the novice, but not as important, I think, than for the advanced lifter, because these people generally are like, well, I can lift this much weight, so I should be doing this in this much load in my particular power movement. So just kind of backing it up a little bit, that contrast training, it's important to understand that what I started with was a heavy lift at, let's say, 80% of my 1 to 3 rep maximum, right? And then I moved into very low load, explosive power movement, right? So the example might be the squat, right? So I went from a squat, a barbell loaded back squat, right? It's called barbell back squat. Then I moved immediately into like a broad jump or a box jump or something that forced me to, under some level of fatigue, right? But also under, to your point, the CNS, an active central nervous system, make that box jump happen for low reps, right? Let's say 10 or less, and impact the body that way. That is one way an advanced athlete could begin this. Start with your fundamental movements that you're really good at doing, and then add in more control, or much lower loaded, much more self-limiting type movements. So again, the box jump or the broad jump, right? It doesn't have to be very far. Start with shorter versus doing something where you're adding load to the body beyond your body weight and gravity, and again, the dynamic of that velocity that you're putting into the movement. So it's something basic. That's one way to start to implement it. I tell you what, I one of the things that really bothers me when I look at coaches training athletes is everybody wants to advance their people to this power training super quick. They want to do what all the pro athletes are doing all the time. And I see it a lot like in youth training. I mean, all of a sudden I see a kid that can barely run. He looks like you said Bambi on ice, looks like a baby giraffe out there running in general, and they fucking hook a parachute to this kid.
Just say parachute training.
Or a fucking sled. Yeah. And they're dragging it through. Parents, if that's what your coach is, if that's where you're sending your kid, and the coach is doing that to your kid right now at 10, 11 years old, get the fuck out of there. Like that is a recipe for disaster. It might look cool, might look good on the gram. Your kid might feel like they're the next, I don't know, Walter Payton or whoever out there, but that's not appropriate. That is not appropriate. We haven't established those fundamentals yet, right? And I think I see a lot of, people reaching for programs and things like that, where I start to see like you're starting to apply the stuff in a little bit of a wacky way. Let's back it up.
Well, when it's funny that you're talking about the athletes and the young kids. I see a lot of athletes that were ex-professionals coming out and training kids. They don't know what they're doing.
Oh.
And the training's horrible, right? But they're doing the same things that they were taught to do, right? And I don't know.
As a professional athlete. Or even as a youth athlete unknowingly. Yeah.
$1 million, assets that get trained subpar. I mean, in my opinion, I mean, they could have a lot more. Like when they come out and they're ripping their Achilles tendon the first week.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
They weren't doing any of prerequisites. They weren't doing any mobility training in the off season. They weren't doing anything. And I mean, you can be lazy as a professional athlete in the off season, whatever.
Right. Same with the strength coach that's training them. But I think to bring it back, like if you're a more advanced athlete, there are ways to start to implement this, and it depends on your goal, depends on your workout history, depends on your training age, depends on previous health history. Do you have, we have to understand what's appropriate for you. So just choosing a program without that high level of awareness or high level of understanding of yourself or having somebody to kind of guide you through it, that's a risky prospect. And there are training modalities out there. We've seen them. We mentioned CrossFit up front that use a lot of power of the power component inside their programming. And quite frankly, that's where we get the aftermath of that.
I was just going to say, and what have we seen over the years with that? So,
well, it goes back. I mean, you mentioned like poor shoulder mechanics coupled with poor hip and thoracic back mechanics or posterior chain mechanics. All this stuff starts to add up over time, and what we wind up with is we have to unfuck them, from basically misappropriately poor application of exercise programming to the individual. So hard to say where you should or shouldn't start, but I think what we can say is no matter where you're coming into this, your fundamentals are extraordinarily important.
Agreed, 1,000%. And the other thing is too, when we're talking about where do you apply power within your workouts, the other thing you have to ask or look at is what's our time frame that we have to have this individual ready for this specific event. I mean, if they're an athlete or if they're a weekend seasonal warrior, maybe power isn't necessarily appropriate for them in this particular cycle of where they are in their training.
Yeah, that speaks to the periodization of your training program. And if you don't have periodization in your annual training program, then you're doing yourself a disservice. The body is going to respond or adapt, respond. It needs recovery. You could really benefit, even like you're a bodybuilder, you could benefit by doing some power training. It just needs to be applied appropriately within your program at an appropriate time. And then that also speaks to the nutrition component, right? And what you're doing with your nutrition during those times. And you might, if you're periodizing your training, you should be periodizing your nutrition to support those things as well. But yeah, to your point, like why are we doing it, but also when do we need to have it done by? And typically for the athlete, the power training is kind of that just before we've peaked, right? We're coming into that peak phase. Like if you're a weightlifter, right? Like an Olympic weightlifter, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to time out perfectly. Like you're meeting the top of that power band on the day that you walk into your competition. And that takes a high level of awareness and adjustment and toggling switches and twisting dials for the individual athlete. So you're right. I mean, there is no perfect way, but I think in general, there is a way to provide programming for people that can help them get there and introduce them to it in an appropriate way. And I wish people did more periodized programming. I just see them kind of getting bored, not really sticking to a program long enough, blaming the program for the results that they're not getting when they're not consistent or they're not following it or they're trying to get off piste somehow to get there. But if I had to put together a program for somebody to get them involved in some type of power training, and this would be, I want to be specific here, for like a maybe intermediate to advanced lifter, I feel comfortable saying, okay, generally speaking, if we took like a 4-month approach to this, right? It's like a 16-week approach. And I spent the first month really kind of revisiting some of my fundamental movement patterns, really spent some time working on the mobility to understand where my shortcomings might be so that I can start applying those things now for the next 4 months. The work that I do there never stops, right? It generally doesn't stop. Yeah, it keeps going, right? So in that first month, I'm doing those things. And then in my second month, I'm now taking what I've learned and what I've focused on in month number 2, and I'm really working on maybe building some hypertrophy, right? I'm working into like a hypertrophy phase where I'm trying to build some muscle in those areas where I know I'm weak, that have been uncovered or discovered during this, this kind of this revisiting or ramp up kind of on-ramping phase to my program. So I do that kind of in month 2. It's very consistent, right? Like I'm not randomly picking exercises. Like it's very specific, very structured. There's a framework to this. I'm tracking it. I'm seeing, am I making improvements? Where are my challenges? And then I work it, now that I've had these fundamentals underneath me, then I work into maybe for the next month, maybe a way more specific strength program that prepares me now, as these other 2 months have been preparing me for moving into my introduction to power or my reintroduction to the power phase, so that I can really express all the work that I've done over those previous 3 months in the power phase. And effectively, then that 4th month moving into the power phase, it's very controlled, right? And it's not, we can call it like a cash out phase. I'm getting the ability to kind of see the fruits of all my labor over those previous 3 months. And we do that for a period of time as the body adapts. And then after that, for maybe 5, maybe as long as 6 weeks for this person, I come back to the beginning of this, right? And I revisit it all over, and I let my body recover. I address things that came up along the way. Again, maybe some of that mobility got better in some areas and it didn't in others. And I recognize this because I've gone through this patterning. And I think effectively people could do that over the course of a year. Like every 4 months, they're just kind of rotating back through this. And if you were smart about it, you could time it to where it made sense for you for ski season, right? Or for your athletic summer season. Like exactly, like you want to have that athletic body for the pool parties and the beach trips and everything else. I think people could kind of do that. But it's about application, goals, right? Obviously ability, training age, all of those, your current health status, your past health status, all of that is important. But it's really just about the application of exercise, and stop trying to jump right into the sexy shit, or as I've said before, stop trying to do black belt shit as a white belt. You're not ready for that yet.